this week's market update, I wanted to give you just kind of what's been going on. I had a couple of closings last week, and one I want to speak to, it closed and everything was fine. But so I've been doing this for 20 years, and we all as agents make mistakes. Like we forget to do something we're supposed to do. Usually it's minor, or we misspell something, or something like of that nature. Um, One time, it's like after the sale, I forget to have the sign taken down, stuff like that. Like, and then I get yelled at by the other, come get your sign out of there, stuff like that. So I had a closing, and this was like over 2 weeks ago, I guess, at this point. Um, the agent said, oh, the appraisal came back fine. So I said, okay, well, please remove the contingency. So she did. She sent us the thing removing the contingency. And I would say less than 24 hours later, the appraiser called me, and he said, the underwriter is challenging the appraisal. And I said, well, we've already removed the contingency. He's like, well, they're challenging it. So I assumed that someone made a mistake. And so I would want people to help me out if I had accident. I don't think that's a mistake I would make, and I'll tell you why. So I spent an hour and a half like going through the comps, trying to find all these things. Also with the property, like ours has, like, I looked at all the pictures, like this property, the seals on the windows you can see are all broken. Our windows are newer. So I really took the time because I wanted to really help out the buyer and the other agent. I was the listing agent. And there was a comp, and it had closed in January in the neighborhood, but it was a 3-bedroom. Ours was a 2-bedroom, but it sold for like $40,000 or $50,000 more. And there's not, that's, a huge difference, right, for 1 bedroom. So that should have been a good comp. But whatever underwriting department at this bank, and it was one of what we'll call the big banks, which are really just a pain in the ass to deal with. I mean, they have so much red tape, where my particular lender, Christine at Movement Mortgage, their underwriters are better. They really look at things, and they're not trying to give anyone a problem, where I feel like some of the bigger banks are just trying to make things more difficult. And my buyer had bought the house, like, I don't know, 2 years ago, and they were trying to say the house was worth less than what she bought it for 2 years ago, which we all know we're in a market that's going up. It's not a declining market. Yes, it's not going up at the rate it was, but even if you take 3 or 4% per year into it, the house would appraise for more. There was just like one really low comp where someone, I guess, didn't care and got rid of their house in fourth quarter of last year. So I had used comps of similar properties within half a mile to a mile, which is usually what appraisers do, that were more current. And for whatever reason, the underwriters didn't want to use these. So I submit all this stuff to the appraiser. 2 weeks roll around, I hear nothing. So I just assume we're fine. Not that it's affects us, because they had already removed the contingency and they didn't have a financing contingency. So the buyer was stuck. I mean, my client was in the clear, but I was just trying to be nice. I always try to be nice to help out other agents where I can. So the day before closing, or a couple days before closing, the weekend before, the agent calls me and says, the house didn't appraise. We just found out. And I said, well, first of all, you removed the appraisal contingency, so you have no way out. Number two, I knew this was a problem over 2 weeks ago, and I sent her all my emails with the appraiser, all my texts that were date and timestamp. I said, the fact that the bank, it has not mentioned this after 2 weeks, that's a critical error on their part as well. So she's like, well, my buyer says she's not going to close because she's not buying a house that is worth less. If she's not paying more than the appraisal for the house. And I said, well, unfortunately, you have no other outs. And so my seller can sue your buyer for not completing the closing, which I would have strongly suggested that she did do that. Her earnest money deposit was $10,000, so in theory she would have been able to keep that, but the difference in the appraisal was about $25,000. So there was that. So I immediately contacted my attorney and I said, this is what's going on. I don't know if this is what's going to happen. I said, I'm assuming if she doesn't close, that my client, based on stuff being removed, had already rented another place in Florida, had moved out of the place, because you have to move several days before the closing, right? So it can get cleaned and all that. So there would have been, like, she still would have had to make mortgage and condo payments. She would have paid for utilities. Plus, if the house did sell for less than what our contract price was, there was that. So there's all, she paid for, like, I don't know, $1,400 worth of home inspection items. So there was that money. So I said to my attorney, I was like, could she go after all this? And he's like, yes, she could go after it. You were very right in what you're saying. So that was great. And I said, well, how much do you charge for a threatening letter if we need to go there? And he said $500, that he would write a letter and we would give it to the buyer if she said she wasn't going to close. So I just sort of was getting all my ducks in a row, because that's how I like to do that. In the worst case, I called my client, I told her this is what's happening, just so she wasn't like in the dark about it if they didn't show up like 2 days later. And my client's like, well, I'm supposed to sign money. I said, well, yeah, you're going to sign, you're going to complete your part of the closing, so you're not in default. And if they don't sign, then they'll be in default, and then you can take legal action against them. Well, luckily in this whole time period while I was doing my due diligence to see what we could do with a threatening letter or whatever, the agent came back and said, my client is going to close and is going to sign. So it did become a non-issue. I did notice that the agent basically credited her entire commission to the buyer, which was for this particular property, it was $10,000. So yeah, I mean, that's a very costly mistake. She did the right thing. I mean, I've had things where other things have happened and I've seen no commission credit from the buyer's agent, which I was just really astounded by. But especially when you make a mistake of that magnitude. So what I'll say is, like, what I do, so this is not a mistake that I would make, is I learned very early on that your buyer will get the appraisal. I don't get a copy of it unless they give it to me, because they have to the bank can't give it to me. They have to get permission from the buyer. So what I always do is it comes in, but that doesn't mean underwriting has fully approved it yet. So I always say to my loan officer, Christine, I say, has it been fully approved by underwriting? And if she says yes, then I will remove the appraisal contingency. If it hasn't, then I just hold off for a few days until they approve it. And another thing too is, like, this buyer didn't have a financing contingency. She was putting over 20% down. So a lot of times the underwriters are more lenient when you're putting 20 to 30% down. And a lot of times when you're putting 30%, they're like, it's in the range, and they just approve it. Or you don't even they waive it. They don't even make you pay to get the appraisal. So there's that as well. So I always ask if it's been approved by underwriting before I remove a contingency. So that is really something smart that agents should do, or the clients should know about, just so you don't get yourself in a situation because of it. I mean, I had another situation too, like I was telling you about, like, so I was the listing agent, and the buyer's agent missed the deadline for the home inspection to give me the report and stuff. So we didn't have to do anything. And that agent didn't give their client a credit, and they had a whole laundry list. I mean, I can't believe they didn't do that, but whatever. Oh, but what I was saying with the other one, didn't have a financing contingency. So, like, there have been situations where that buyer, if they had a financing contingency, they could go buy a car, or they figure out how much will mess up their DTI, and then they do something with their finances where they will no longer be approved for the mortgage, and then they get out on that. I mean, I had a buyer who wanted to get out on something. We did the home inspection, um, and we wrote a bunch of inspection items, and then she decided she wanted something else done. I was like, well, that was supposed to be in the home inspection. We went through all of this, and she didn't do it. So she went and spent her down payment money so she could get out on financing. So people do crazy stuff like this. So I was lucky in this particular situation for my buyer that the girl who was buying it didn't have a financing contingency. So she was not able to go do something like that, which people do stuff like that when they want to get out of contracts. It's a little crazy. But yeah, it happens. So it's just, really make sure the person you work with knows what they're doing. And I'll be honest with you, we all started from the beginning, and I had a mentor when I started. So I ran everything by him. My husband was like, you must be driving him crazy. And I'm like, yeah, but if he was the broker of our office, I'm like, so if I make a mistake, and it's something that could get the office in trouble too, or the office sued, it's on him. So it's in his best interest. And he was taking a part of my commission too, so that I could use him as a resource for that. So I think it's, and I have other friends that have been in the business and new in the business, and they ask me questions about stuff. And that is the smart thing to do, is because what you don't know, you don't know. And I've been doing it for 22 years. And let me tell you, new stuff comes up. Even make sure you have an agent that is moving with the times and keeping up with the current technology and things of that nature. So anyways, thanks again for watching, and call, text, email, or comment if I can help you with your real estate needs. See you next week.